G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of BlankCanvasTV.com. My name's Andre Knott and we are changing the way you see and experience art. And today I'm excited. I'll tell you why I'm excited. I'm right here in the middle of St. Petersburg, Russia. And it's not a very easy place to get to. It's a very historic and artistic place, but it's somewhere that you absolutely must get to sometime in your life if you are in fact some sort of an art lover. Any sort of an art lover, you must make your way here. I'm actually standing right in the heart of St. Peter's Square. St. Peter's Square was created in a very neoclassical type fashion, something like Vienna. And this city itself has been named or dubbed the Venice of the North. But it's also got a lot of a touch of the Habsburg Empire, like you see behind me right here as well. And all of the square itself is very much in that neoclassical period of the late 1700s, early 1800s. It was developed by, the area itself was developed by, first of all, Peter the Great in the early 1700s. And then the mantle was taken over by Catherine the Great, who was also called the Great, back in the 1760s, 1770s, 1780s. She's a very powerful woman, in fact. And we're standing right here in the middle of St. Peter's Square, which was dedicated in his honour by Catherine the Great in the latter part of the 18th century. Right now we're standing in St. Peter's Square, as I said, but behind me is the Hermitage. It's the classic winter palace. You'll see the colour in the building here, the colour in the buildings in general here in St. Petersburg, very colourful. It's because they live in pretty much 6 months of snow and ice and winter, so they like to colour up the buildings. But this is also another part of very neoclassical architecture with the Roman and Greek type columns and also all the statues that you see around. But have a look at the architecture that you see behind me right here on the Winter Palace. This was the palace of the Tsars, right from the time of Peter the Great all the way through to the first part of the 20th century when with the Soviet uprising. This was the palace of the Tsars, and it's where Nicholas II literally abdicated his throne to his brother Michael in the last days before the storming of this Winter Palace over here. So it's a very rich culture regarding the city itself, but that's to say nothing of the art. You see, back in the early part or the mid part of the 18th century, Catherine the Great started one of the greatest collections of fine art ever put together, and it continued. She was very well known for being able to procure art. She was very talented as a leader, but also talented in her ability to procure art from other leaders around Europe. You see, not many of the European leaders knew much about Russian art and culture and the Russians in general, and she was well known for having swapped or traded one painting of herself for so many of French or English painters and the like. You'll see even the obelisk right here in the centre, somewhat similar to Greek or Roman architecture as well. Some people say has elements of Egyptian type of monument in it as well, but definitely neoclassical in its style. But Catherine the Great, she put that collection together, or started putting that collection together, and her ancestors thereafter, each of the Tsars thereafter, definitely added to that collection. And this building behind me, the Hermitage, or the Winter Palace as it was known and is known to this day, but the Hermitage State Collection is one of the greatest museums on earth. In fact, right now there are over 3 million, did you hear me? 3 million works of art in this museum. They say that if you spent 1 minute in front of each work and you actually stayed in front of it for all the opening hours, that's 8 hours a day, you'd be going through this palace for 11 years. That's 7 days a week. 11 years to get through the whole museum. Even if it was every day, every minute of every day, it'd take you over 3 years to see the whole collection. In fact, the building is massive, and I've just been in there for about the 17th time. I love coming back here. I'll come back again and again in my career, and every time I see something different, because it's impossible to see the whole collection, but the collection is monumental, it's excellent, it is absolutely worth the trip just for this museum right here. But the Hermitage actually stretches into a number of other buildings across the way right here as well, and goes all the way down the Neva River, quite some ways down the Neva River there as well. So you can see how big the square is here, but let's get back to the collection. In the Hermitage you will actually see some 40 works by Rembrandt van Rijn, one of the greatest Dutch masters, one of the greatest painters of all time. You'll see over 40 works by other Dutch masters, the likes of any of the Impressionist masters as well. There are rooms full of Picasso. There are rooms full of Matisse. There are rooms full of Renoir. I mean, there are more works than any other museum that I've seen of these great masters on planet Earth today. In this museum as well, something's very, very special as well. 8 works by Titian, as well as 1 work by the great Caravaggio, and 2 works by Mr. Leonardo da Vinci. Also 2 works by Raphael, and I've cast my eyes on those again today. It's just an absolute sight for sore eyes. Please, if you go in there, do not take flash photography. It is not permitted, and if people do, it's really very disrespectful to the art, considering there are only 14 Da Vincis that we know of in the world today. So this is encasing 1/7 of the entire collection right here in the State Hermitage. But the collection became so massive and so great throughout the 19th century, and it was open to the public for the very first time in the middle part of that century in 1852. It had become very, very much a trend throughout Europe that the kings and queens and nobility would open up their vast collections to the masses to give them a look at some of the culture as well. So they were starting to share their culture. But by the end of the 19th century, in the early part of the 20th century, things had become so strained in Europe that you had revolution all over the place, and particularly here in Russia. The Soviets chose a very unique and opportune time when the Russian Imperial Army was fighting off the Germans in Europe during the First World War to lay siege to the Great Palace right here, and that's where, of course, Tsar Nicholas II and his family fled, and of course the Soviets took over. The Bolsheviks then took over some years later, and that's when a lot of the collection was procured. They say procured from the Russian nobility, and so you had all of the Russian art that had already been in there, as well as the nobility all around the country was brought into this particular spot and into the old Winter Palace, and so the collection became even more massive than it was already. But it faced a really huge challenge in the Second World War, where for 867 days Hitler's army laid siege to the city of St. Petersburg, and for 867 days it absolutely withstood the siege of Hitler's army and the Nazis. And what we found was that these great treasures of St. Petersburg in general were saved. You see, the Nazis were going to absolutely flatten St. Petersburg. They were actually going to flatten it raise it to the ground and show their dominance and their power throughout Europe. By doing so, they didn't get to do it. The Russians held on, the Soviets held on, and but in the meantime, they had been for many months, 24 hours a day, casing up the art and sending it to Moscow so that it would not actually be damaged if that were the case. At the end of the Second World War, 1945, they brought it all back en masse and put it up again, and so the Hermitage continued its long and rich tradition. The capital of Russia actually moved to Moscow back at the Bolshevik uprising at the First World War, but St. Petersburg was still very much the cultural home of the arts in Russia, and so the ballet and all of the arts, the performing arts, and also the rich painted arts and visual arts were very much still at home right here in St. Petersburg. So a very, very amazing culture, rich history, and I would absolutely recommend that absolutely everyone watching right here today get into the Hermitage at some point. As I said, not a very easy place to get to, St. Petersburg, Russia, but well worth the journey. You must spend at least a week here absolutely absorbing all the rich culture and exciting architecture that is here on offer. Remember, the Venice of the North and one of the absolute gateways to Northern Europe. My name's Andre Knott. I am your host of BlankCanvasTV.com. Make sure you tune in to another episode over the coming days, weeks and or months, and we'll see you again.